Power doesn't announce itself. It eats quietly, surrounded by people trained not to look too closely. The dining room was designed to make violence impossible. Biometric locks sealed every entrance. Armed guards stood at measured distances. The air itself felt disciplined, silent, obedient, controlled. This was how Sang-jun liked it. Crystal glasses chimed softly as courses were served with ritual precision. His lieutenants spoke only when spoken to. No one raised their voice. No one reached too fast. In this house, even breathing felt monitored. And in the corner of the room moved the help. Alana kept her eyes down, her posture perfect, her presence forgettable. She poured wine, cleared plates, and vanished between steps, so efficient she registered as furniture. That was the point. Men like Sang-jun didn't fear maids. They feared armies. But Alana noticed the silence where the security dogs should have been. The half-second delay in a guard's response. The way the lights dimmed, not failed, just enough. When the suppressed shot cracked through the room and Sang-jun's shoulder bloomed red, his soldiers froze. The maid didn't. She stepped forward, lifted a silver tray, and ended the illusion that this dinner was ever safe. Before the story begins, take a second to like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. The silver serving tray lay on the Italian marble floor, dented and stained with the arterial spray of a man who had underestimated a maid. The ringing in the air, the aftermath of gunfire and shattered crystal, was slowly being replaced by the heavy, wet sound of Sang-jun's breathing. He was slumped against the mahogany sideboard, his hand pressed firmly against his left shoulder where the charcoal fabric of his suit was sodden and black. Alana didn't move. She stood in the center of the wreckage, her white apron splattered with a constellation of red. In her right hand she still held the paring knife, gripped not like a kitchen tool, but like a tactical extension of her arm. Her eyes weren't on the three bodies cooling on the floor, but on the man she was paid to serve. "The carotid is intact," Alana said, her voice a calm, low vibration that seemed to anchor the chaos of the room. "But the bullet is lodged near the clavicle. If you keep putting pressure there, you'll trigger a hematoma. Move your hand 2 inches toward the sternum." Sang-jun didn't move his hand. Instead, with a grimace that bared his teeth, his right hand drifted toward the waistband of his trousers. In one fluid, agonizing motion, he produced a customized Kimber .45 and leveled it at her chest. The barrel was steady despite the tremor in his frame. "Who are you?" Sang-jun rasped. His dark eyes, usually cold and distant, were now burning with a predatory focus. He ignored the dead men, the shattered windows, and the failure of his own security detail. His world had narrowed down to the woman in the blood-stained apron. Alana didn't flinch at the sight of the gun. She had stared down far larger bores in places the world chose to forget. "I'm the person who just saved your life, Sang-jun. And if you don't let me dress that wound in the next 4 minutes, I'll be the person who watches you bleed out on your own rug." "No maid moves like that," he spat, the gun cocked. "No maid maps a room by the exit points and the kill zones. You didn't just fight them. You dismantled them. You're a plant. CIA? NIS? Or did Jinho hire a ghost to watch me sleep before she tucked me in for the long nap?" Alana took a deliberate step forward. The click of the safety on Sang-jun's pistol echoed in the hollow room. "I was a combat medic with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment," she said, her voice stripping away the subservient lilt she had used for the last 6 months. "I spent 10 years stitching together men much meaner than you under fire that would make this dinner party look like a Sunday school picnic. I'm not a ghost and I'm not a plant. I'm a woman who wanted to forget what it felt like to have blood under her fingernails. But you brought a war into my dining room, and my body remembered what to do before my mind could stop it." She stepped into the light of the flickering chandelier, the knife dropping from her fingers to clatter harmlessly on the floor. She held up her hands, palms open. The security dogs didn't bark, Sang-jun. The perimeter sensors didn't trip. This wasn't an infiltration. It was an invitation. Your men didn't just fail, they stepped aside. Sang-jun's jaw tightened. The realization hit him harder than the bullet. The pain in his shoulder was nothing compared to the sudden, icy vacuum of isolation. He looked at Alana, really looked at her, and saw the shadow in the corner had become the only pillar left standing in his temple of control. Slowly, the barrel of the Kimber lowered, though he didn't put the weapon away. Why stay? Why save me? Alana reached into her apron pocket, pulling out a compact emergency trauma kit she had kept hidden for months. Because I'm tired of being the only one who survives. Now sit back and hold your breath. This is going to hurt more than the bullet. The smell of antiseptic and copper hung heavy in the air, as Alana worked with the cold efficiency of a machine. She had Sang-Jun's shirt open, his expensive suit jacket discarded on the blood-slicked floor like a molted skin. Her fingers moved with a phantom memory, packing the wound with gauze from her kit, her eyes never leaving the monitor of the house's security system flickering on the wall. Don't look at the screen, Sang-Jun. Look at me, she commanded, her voice cutting through his burgeoning shock. He obeyed, his pupils dilated, his breath hitching as she applied pressure. The security feed was a gallery of ghosts. The elite guards who should have been swarming the dining room were nowhere to be seen. In the grand foyer, two men stood perfectly still, their weapons lowered, watching the hallway as if waiting for a guest rather than an assassin. There was no shouting, no sirens, no frantic radio chatter. There was only a terrifying, curated silence. They aren't coming to help, Sang-Jun wheezed, the realization settling into his bones with more weight than the lead in his shoulder. My own house. It's turned. It's not just turned. It's a cage, Alana said, snapping her kit shut. The front gates are locked from the outside. The jammer is active, my phone has no bars and neither does your landline. They didn't just come for a hit. They came for a funeral. Sang-Jun tried to stand but his knees buckled. Alana caught him, her small frame surprisingly solid beneath his weight. She draped his uninjured arm over her shoulders, her blood-stained apron pressing against his skin. Where is the override? She whispered. The library, he managed, his voice strained. The third bookshelf. But the hall is covered by cameras. Then we don't use the hall. Alana looked toward the service pantry, a place the tiger of Bususan had likely never stepped foot in. She kicked aside a decorative screen, revealing a narrow wood-paneled door used by the staff to move unnoticed between floors. Your architect was clever, but your maid was observant. You built this place to be a fortress, but every fortress has a crawl space. They moved into the darkness of the service corridor. The air here was cooler, smelling of dust and floor wax. Sang-Jun's breathing was a ragged staccato against her ear. Every few feet, Alana paused, her head tilted, listening to the vibration of boots on the floorboards above them. She wasn't just walking. She was hunting for the gaps in the enemy's perimeter. Why help me? Sang-Jun asked, his voice a ghost of its usual authority. You could have slipped out the back. You could have let them have me. Because I know what Jinho will do to this city if he takes your chair, Alana replied, her eyes scanning the dark. And because I'm tired of watching men who think their gods burn everything down because they're bored. Now shut up and move. We're at the library junction. She pressed a hidden catch in the paneling. The wall groaned and slid back, revealing the opulent gloom of the library. But as the door opened, a red laser dot danced across Sang-Jun's chest. Alana didn't wait. She lunged, pulling Sang-Jun down behind a heavy oak desk just as a suppressed round thudded into the leather-bound books behind them. The silence of the house had been broken. The trap was closing and the only way out was down, into the tunnel Sang-Jun had built for his enemies, now the only hope for his own survival. Alana reached for the knife she had tucked into her waistband, her eyes turning into flint. The maid was gone. The soldier was home. The transition from the estate's hidden tunnels to the neon-drenched grime of the city felt like surfacing for air in a pool of oil. They had abandoned Sang-Jun's armored SUV 3 miles back, swapping it for a stolen, nondescript sedan that Alana had hot-wired with a practiced flick of a jagged paperclip. Now they climbed the narrow, creaking stairs of a walk-up in a neighborhood where the police only came in pairs and the streetlights were mostly decorative. Alana's apartment was a shock of silence. It was a single room that smelled of lavender and gun oil, a space so devoid of personality it felt like a waiting room for a life that hadn't started yet. There was a single bed with hospital corners, a small wooden table, and a kitchenette that looked like it had never seen a home-cooked meal. No photos graced the walls, no clutter betrayed a soul. Sang-joon grunted as Alana eased him into the lone chair by the window. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the gray pallor of blood loss. As she moved to fetch a fresh basin of water, her movements were a blur of efficient muscle. She stripped off the blood-soaked apron, revealing a simple black tank top that left nothing to the imagination regarding her history. Sang-joon's breath hitched, but not from the pain in his shoulder. In the harsh flickering light of a nearby billboard he saw them. A roadmap of violence etched into her skin. There was the jagged white line of a shrapnel exit wound on her collarbone, the puckered circular mark of a 7.62 round on her ribs, and a long ropey burn across her shoulder blade that could only have come from an IED blast. "You've been to the front," Sang-joon whispered, his voice sandpaper dry. Alana didn't look up as she snapped on a pair of latex gloves. "I was a ghost medic, Sang-joon. My job was to go into the holes where the sun didn't shine and pull out the boys the government said didn't exist. My scars aren't trophies. They're just receipts for a life I'm trying to pay off." Her eyes drifted toward a small locked metal box on the high shelf above her bed. The lid was slightly ajar, revealing the glint of a silver star and a purple heart resting atop a stack of folded discharge papers. They looked alien in this dingy flat. Pieces of a hero's life tucked away in a place where people came to disappear. Sang-joon looked from the metals to the woman currently probing his wound with a pair of sterilized tweezers. He had spent his life building a reputation as a monster, using tattoos and expensive suits to project a shadow of terror. But looking at Alana, he felt like a child playing with toy soldiers. His violence had been for profit, for ego, for the cold acquisition of territory. Hers had been for survival, for the person next to her, for a country that had forgotten her name the moment she hung up the uniform. "I thought I knew what war was," Sang-joon admitted, his head lolling back against the wall as the sting of the antiseptic bit into his flesh. "I thought I was the apex predator in this city." Alana finally looked him in the eye, her gaze as steady as a sniper's scope. "In this city, maybe. But the world is a lot bigger than these four corners, Sang-joon. And the people who run it don't wear tailored suits. They wear shadows." She pulled the flattened slug from his shoulder with a sharp clink into the metal basin. "You're lucky. It hit the bone and deflected outward. You'll keep the arm." "Why the metals?" he asked, nodding toward the shelf. "If you want to forget, why keep the proof?" Alana paused, her fingers hovering over his skin. A ghost of a shadow passed over her face, the first crack in her military mask. "To remind myself that I used to be someone who saved people. Before I became someone who just knew how to hide." She began to wrap the bandage, her touch unexpectedly gentle. In the quiet of the Spartan flat, the king of the underworld and the ghost of the battlefield sat in a silence that was no longer a cage, but a bridge. Outside the city screamed, but inside, two monsters were beginning to wonder if they could ever be human again. The spastic neon light of a nearby liquor store sign flickered through the thin blinds of Alana's apartment, casting rhythmic bars of blue and red across the scarred surface of her wooden table. Sang-joon sat upright now, his shoulder immobilized by a clean sling Alana had fashioned from a torn bedsheet. The air between them had shifted. The shock of the attack had calcified into a cold, shared focus. Alana sat opposite him, a battered laptop open between them. The screen's glow reflected in her sharp, unblinking eyes as her fingers danced across the keys with the velocity that spoke of years spent in signal intelligence units. She wasn't just browsing. She was dissecting the digital remains of the estate's security failure. "The server at your house is supposed to be air-gapped," Alana muttered, her voice a low rasp in the quiet room. "But every system has a back door if you know where to knock. I pulled the logs from the secondary cloud backup before your IT team could scrub the errors." Sang-joon leaned in, his jaw tight. "The biometric scanners at the gate require a physical match. Retinal and fingerprint. Even if they had my codes, they didn't have my body. They didn't need your body, Alana said. She tapped a key, bringing up a string of raw code. Look at the timestamp for 9:10 p.m. 5 minutes before the breach. The system didn't detect a match. It was told to stop looking for one. Someone initiated a system maintenance override from an internal terminal. She scrolled deeper, her brow furrowing. To do this, you need a level alpha clearance. There are only 2 people in your organization with that kind of access. You and your head of operations. Jin Ho, Sang-jun whispered. The name felt like a piece of glass in his throat. Jin Ho had been with him since the slums of Busan. They had shared meals when there was only one bowl of rice between them. They had shared blood when the rival gangs tried to take their territory. He wouldn't. He has no reason. In my experience, reason is usually the first thing that dies when someone offers enough money or enough power, Alana countered. She pulled up a subfile, her eyes narrowing. Wait, this isn't just an override. Look at the script used to mask the entry. It's a specific sequence, a Wraith protocol. It's designed to delete the user's digital footprint as they move through the system. She paused, highlighting a tiny, almost invisible fragment of code left in the buffer. But whoever did this was arrogant. They used a custom encryption key at the very end to seal the log. It's a signature, Sang-jun. A digital thumbprint. She hit the enter key and a small icon appeared on the screen. A stylized geometric tiger lily. The color drained from Sang-jun's face. That wasn't just any symbol. It was the personal seal Jin Ho used on his private correspondence, a nod to the garden their mother had kept back in Korea. It was a taunt, a silent declaration of war from the one person Sang-jun had trusted to guard his back. He didn't just let them in, Sang-jun said, his voice dropping into a register of terrifying calm. He choreographed it. He wanted me to know it was him before I died. He made a mistake, Alana said, closing the laptop with a decisive snap. He assumed I was just a maid who would scream and run. He didn't account for a ghost being in the house. She stood up, her movements fluid and lethal, and reached for a hidden panel under the sink. When she pulled it back, it wasn't cleaning supplies she retrieved, but a 6-hour P226 and 3 spare magazines. The signature tells us where he's going, she said, checking the chamber with a metallic clack. Jin Ho doesn't do anything without a safety net. If he's burning your empire, he's doing it from the one place he feels untouchable. Sang-jun stood, ignoring the flare of pain in his shoulder. The tiger was back, but this time he was hunting with a partner the world would never see coming. The Golden Lotus Lounge, he growled. It's his fortress. If he's there, he'll have half the syndicate with him. Then it's a good thing I brought enough ammo for everyone, Alana replied, her face a mask of stone. Let's go find your brother. The transition from the Spartan stillness of Alana's apartment to the suffocating heat of the Golden Lotus Lounge was a descent into a different kind of war zone. The air here was thick with the scent of expensive tobacco, aged whiskey, and the metallic tang of desperation. Below the legitimate surface of the city, this subterranean den served as the counting house for the underworld's elite, a place where fortunes were laundered and loyalty was bought by the highest bidder. Sang-jun walked through the heavy gilded doors with a slow, measured gait, his arm tucked into a sling hidden beneath an overcoat of Italian wool. He looked every bit the wounded king returning to claim his throne, a distraction of pure, unadulterated power. But the true threat was the woman walking 3 paces behind him, dressed in the crisp black and white uniform of a private service attendant. Alana kept her head bowed, her eyes fixed on the floor, but her mind was a thermal map of the room. She wasn't looking at the high-stakes baccarat tables or the sprawling displays of wealth. She was counting holsters. She noted the bulge of a submachine gun under a tuxedo jacket near the bar, and the way the 2 waiters, by the private elevator, stood with their weight on the balls of their feet. He's in the back, Sang-jun murmured, his voice barely audible over the low hum of the lounge. The private suite. That's where Jin Ho keeps his money man. A shark named Vane who handles the cartel's offshore transitions. I see the cameras, Alana replied, her lips barely moving. There's a blind spot near the service cart at the east pillar. If I can get into the ventilation crawlspace above the kitchen, I can drop into the suite service closet. You have 2 minutes once you leave my side, Sang-jun warned. The moment they realize you aren't just staff, this room turns into a kill box. Then don't let them look at me, Alana said. As they reached the center of the lounge, Sang-jun deliberately stumbled, a calculated display of weakness that drew every predatory eye in the room. He called out for a drink, his voice booming with a false bravado that demanded attention. While the security detail shifted their focus to the wounded boss, Alana stepped into the shadows of the east pillar. With a fluid practice motion, she shed her subservient posture. She used the service cart as a stepping stone, hauling herself into the narrow maintenance hatch with a strength that belied her slender frame. The crawl space was a tomb of dust and heat, vibrating with the hum of the building's industrial life. She moved with the silence of a ghost, navigating the steel ribs of the building until she was directly above the private suite. Below, she could hear the rhythmic clicking of poker chips and the cold, flat voice of Vane discussing the final wire transfers for Jin-ho's coup. Alana pulled a small fiber-optic camera from her belt, threading it through a gap in the ceiling tiles. On her wrist-mounted screen, the room came into focus. Vane sat behind a desk of obsidian, flanked by 4 guards. On his laptop screen, a series of transaction codes flickered, the lifeblood of Jin-ho's new empire. Target acquired, she whispered into her comms. She didn't wait for a reply. She kicked out the ceiling panel and dropped. She landed on the shoulders of the nearest guard, her weight driving him into the floor before he could register the breach. In one motion, she drew her suppressed Sig Sauer, the muffled thwip-thwip of the rounds blending into the ambient noise of the lounge outside. By the time Vane reached for the alarm, Alana was standing over him, the barrel of her gun pressed against the soft skin beneath his jaw. Her maid's cap was gone, her hair messy, her eyes burning with the cold light of a veteran who had finally found the trail. Don't touch the button, Vane, she said, her voice a calm, lethal promise. I've spent 10 years learning exactly how to keep a man alive while he screams. Let's talk about Jin-ho's bank accounts. The data Alana had extracted from Vane's laptop was a death sentence for Jin-ho's coup, and the traitor knew it. The moment they stepped out of the Golden Lotus's service exit into the rain-slicked alleyway, the air didn't just feel cold, it felt charged. They're coming, Alana said, her voice a flat, tactical warning. A low guttural roar echoed against the brick walls. 2 high-displacement street bikes swung around the corner, their LED headlamps cutting through the drizzle like the eyes of predatory insects. Alana didn't head for the car. She knew the sedan would be a coffin in these narrow backstreets. Instead, she sprinted toward a heavy Ducati Panigale parked near the loading dock, a bike she'd scouted on the way in. With a practiced kick, she shattered the steering lock. Get on. Hold the data. Sang-jun, his face pale but his eyes burning with a dark, renewed fire, swung his leg over the pillion. His injured shoulder was a liability, but his right hand remained steady as he drew his Kimber .45. Alana kicked the engine to life, the roar of the Ducati drowning out the city's distant hum. She didn't just drive. She became part of the machine, leaning the bike into a hard, 45-degree angle as they screeched out of the alley and onto the main boulevard. The chase was a blur of neon and adrenaline. The 2 pursuing riders were professional, weaving through the late-night traffic with terrifying precision. They weren't just following, they were flanking. Left side, 8 o'clock. Alana shouted over the wind. Sang-jun shifted his weight, his back pressed against hers. He felt the rhythmic strength in her frame, the way she anticipated the flow of the city before it happened. He leaned out, ignoring the white-hot flare of pain in his shoulder, and leveled his weapon. The recoil of the .45 sent a shockwave through both of them, but the bike remained as steady as a surgeon's table. His first shot caught the lead rider's front tire. The bike disintegrated in a spray of sparks and chrome, tumbling into a parked delivery truck. One down. Sang-jun growled, his voice a rasp of grim satisfaction. They dived into the neon-lit belly of the garment district, a labyrinth of tight turns and industrial shadows. Alana pushed the Ducati to its limit, the speedometer needle dancing near the red line. She took corners so sharp that Sang-jun's knee grazed the asphalt, yet her hands never trembled. She was mapping the city the way she had mapped the estate, calculating friction velocity and the exact moment of impact. The second rider opened fire with a submachine gun. Bullets chewed up the pavement inches from their rear tire, whining off the metal light poles. "He's too close, Alana. Hold on," she yelled. She didn't brake. Instead, she accelerated toward a narrow pedestrian bridge, a path barely wide enough for the bike's handlebars. As they hit the incline, she slammed the rear brake, whipping the bike into a controlled 180-degree slide. The sudden pivot brought them face to face with their pursuer. In that split second of suspension, Sang-jun didn't need to be told what to do. He felt the shift in her balance, the silent cue to fire. He emptied the magazine into the rider's chest, the muffled reports lost in the scream of the Ducati's tires. The rider slumped, his bike veering wildly into a pile of shipping crates. Alana didn't linger to watch the wreck. She straightened the bike and accelerated into the dark, the rain washing the gunpowder off their skin. For a moment as they sped toward the harbor, the silence returned, but it was different now. The hierarchy of boss and servant had been incinerated in the heat of the chase. Sang-jun rested his forehead against the back of Alana's neck, his breathing heavy and ragged. He felt the steady, unwavering beat of her heart through her leather jacket. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were a single lethal entity. The tiger and the ghost had found the only thing more dangerous than an enemy, a partner who knew exactly when to pull the trigger. The storm had followed them to the heights of the city, where the ancient stone of the Biomiosa temple stood as a silent witness to a more primitive era of justice. Rain fell in unrelenting sheets, turning the temple's intricate eaves into miniature waterfalls, and the courtyard into a blurred landscape of gray and obsidian. Sang-jun moved through the central gate with a heavy rhythmic limp, his coat dark with water, while Alana remained a shadow behind him, her hand resting on the grip of her holstered Sig Sauer. At the center of the temple's pavilion stood Jin-ho. He was alone, dressed in a simple dark suit that seemed to absorb the dim light. There were no guns in his hands, but the air around him was thick with the presence of hidden men in the surrounding treeline. "I expected the cartel to kill you, Hyung," Jin-ho said, his voice barely raised above the roar of the rain. "But then again, I didn't account for the help." He looked past Sang-jun to Alana, his eyes cold and clinical. "The invisible girl. A mistake I won't make twice." Sang-jun stopped 10 feet away, his chest heaving. "Why, Jin-ho? We built this together. We walked out of the mud in Busan with nothing but each other's names. Was the money really worth burning a lifetime of brotherhood?" Jin-ho let out a short, jagged laugh that held no humor. "Money? You think I'd risk my soul for a few more zeros in a bank account? Look at yourself, Sang-jun. Look at this city." He stepped into the light of a flickering stone lantern, his face twisted in a mask of bitter disappointment. "You're talking about civilization. You're talking about legitimacy. You spent the last year trying to turn the tiger into a house cat." "I was trying to give us a future," Sang-jun countered, his voice cracking with a rare, raw emotion. "A life where we didn't have to check under our cars every morning. That life is for the sheep we fleece, not the wolves who protect them." Jin-ho spat, stepping forward until he was inches from Sang-jun's face. "The city respects us because they fear us. The moment you started shaking hands with senators and donating to hospitals, you made us a target. You're going soft. You're trading our edge for a seat at a table where they'll never truly accept you." "I didn't betray you, Sang-jun. I saved the organization from a leader who forgot that we are made of teeth and claws." Sang-jun looked at his surrogate brother and saw a stranger. A man so consumed by the shadow of their past that he could no longer see the light of any potential future. "Fear isn't a legacy, Jin-ho. It's a debt. And eventually the collectors come for everyone." "Then let them come," Jin-ho whispered. He raised a hand, a signal for the men in the trees. But they won't find a king who died in a silk tie. They'll find a throne built on the bones of a man who was too weak to stay a monster. The click of safeties being disengaged echoed through the courtyard, a metallic harmony that signaled the end of words. Alana stepped forward, her body shielding Sang-jun's blind side. She didn't look at the men in the shadows, she looked only at Jin-ho. "He isn't going soft," Alana said, her voice a calm, lethal edge that cut through the thunder. "He's evolving. You're just the part of his history that refuses to die. And in my line of work we don't argue with history. We bury it." Jin-ho's eyes narrowed as he realized that the maid wasn't just a guard. She was the conviction Sang-jun had been lacking. The storm broke then, a flash of lightning illuminating the courtyard as the first shot rang out, turning the sacred silence of the temple into a final bloody testament of betrayal. The shipyard at midnight was a skeletal landscape of rusted iron and salt air decay, a labyrinth of stacked shipping containers that served as the beating heart of the cartel's smuggling operation. Rain continued to hammer the corrugated metal, creating a rhythmic, deafening roar that masked the sound of boots on wet concrete. Alana moved through the crane shadows with a predatory grace that had long ago replaced the rehearsed movements of a maid. She no longer wore the black and white uniform. She was clad in tactical gear, her face smeared with charcoal, her eyes reflecting the cold amber of the perimeter lights. Beside her, Sang-jun moved like a force of nature. His wounded shoulder was strapped tight, his face set in a mask of granite as he gripped a heavy-caliber shotgun. "For sentries on the gantry," Alana whispered into her comms, her voice a chill vibration. "They're watching the main gate. They aren't looking at the water." "Then we take the back way," Sang-jun replied, the low rumble of his voice vibrating with a thirst for finality. They breached the primary warehouse not with a bang, but with a series of surgical strikes. Alana didn't just fight, she disassembled. When the first guard lunged, she didn't meet his strength with her own. She stepped into his guard, her fingers finding the delicate cluster of nerves in his brachial plexus. With a precise, sickening pop, his arm went limp, his weapon clattering to the floor before a scream could even form in his throat. She followed with a palm strike to the solar plexus, collapsing his diaphragm, leaving him gasping and broken on the oil-stained floor. She moved through the warehouse like a ghost in the machine, using her intimate knowledge of human frailty to neutralize the cartel's muscle. She targeted the popliteal fossa behind the knees to drop men to their faces. She used the edge of her hand against the carotid sinus to induce instant unconsciousness. She was a combat medic in reverse, using her understanding of how to save a life to determine exactly how to halt one. While Alana provided the precision, Sang-jun provided the devastation. He was the hammer to her scalpel. As the cartel realized they were under ghost attack, they converged on the center of the floor. Sang-jun stepped out from behind a stack of crates, the roar of his weapon echoing like thunder in the enclosed space. He didn't hide. He moved forward with the relentless momentum of the tiger he had tried to cage. Every shot was a declaration of reclaimed territory. When a man tried to tackle him, Sang-jun met the impact with a brutal headbutt, and a throw that sent the attacker through a wooden pallet. "Jin-ho is in the upstairs office," Sang-jun shouted over the din of the combat. "Go," Alana commanded, spinning to kick a knife from a mercenary's hand before driving a needle-thin pressure point tool into his thigh, severing his mobility. "I'll hold the floor. Finish it." Sang-jun didn't hesitate. He trusted her to hold the world at bay while he faced his past. He charged up the steel stairs, the metal groaning under his weight, as Alana stood at the base of the staircase. She was surrounded, a dozen men closing in with iron pipes and machetes. She didn't look afraid. She looked back at her years of war, at the countless bodies she had stitched together, and she felt a grim final clarity. She wasn't just a maid and she wasn't just a soldier. She was the one who decided who lived and who died. As the first mercenary swung, Alana stepped into the fray, her movements a blur of lethal medicine and absolute intent. The floor was hers, and tonight, the only thing she was healing was the city's infected heart. The aftermath of the battle for the Ryu estate didn't smell like victory. It smelled of ozone, spent casing, and the bitter winter air rushing through shattered windows. Jin-ho, the protege who had mistaken mercy for weakness, lay defeated, his ambition crushed under the weight of a man he thought was broken. Sang-joon stood over the wreckage of his former life, his knuckles bruised and his dark suit torn, but his eyes were clearer than they had been in years. The black cranes had been purged from the nest, and the silence that followed was no longer the heavy, suffocating quiet of a tomb. It was the stillness of a fresh start. Sable found him on the wide stone terrace overlooking the harbor, where the first hint of violet was beginning to bruise the horizon. She had just tucked Jia into bed. The girl had slept through the final moments of the conflict, shielded by the thick walls of the safe room and the unwavering promise Sable had made to keep her safe. Sable was still wearing the cardigan stained with the dust of the siege, her nursing kit slung over her shoulder like a soldier's pack. Sang-joon didn't turn as she approached, but his shoulders lost their defensive edge at the sound of her footsteps. "The accountants have finished the first round of transfers," he said, his voice a low, tired rasp. "The shipping lanes, the high-interest loans, the protection contracts, they're being liquidated or moved into the charitable foundation. By the time the sun is fully up, the Ryu Syndicate will technically no longer exist." Sable stepped up beside him, the cold salt air stinging her cheeks. "And the man who ran it?" Sang-joon finally looked at her. The gold chain around his neck was gone, lost somewhere in the struggle, but he looked more powerful without it. "He's trying to figure out who he is when he isn't a monster." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small heavy object, pressing it into Sable's palm. It wasn't a piece of jewelry, but a key, brass and old-fashioned. "This is to a house in the valley, away from the stone walls and the earpieces. It has a garden for Jia and a kitchen that doesn't feel like a laboratory. It's a life, Sable. A real one." Sable looked down at the key, then back at the man who had given it to her. The lines of his face were softened by the approaching dawn. The brutal Mafia boss replaced by someone who looked like he was seeing the world for the first time. "Is this part of the job description, Sang-joon? Am I still just the guardian?" He stepped closer, the heat radiating from his body a stark contrast to the winter wind. He reached out, his hand lingering near her face before his thumb traced the line of her jaw with a tenderness that made her breath hitch. "The contract is over, Sable. You saved my daughter and then you saved me. You don't owe us another hour. And if I don't want to leave," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Then we go back to that harbor," he said, gesturing toward the water where the orange sun was finally breaking the surface, turning the gray waves into molten gold. "But not as a boss and his help. Not as a king and his servant. We go back as two people who survived the storm together." Sable reached up, her fingers intertwining with his, grounding him. She thought of her small cafe in the rain and the terrifying thud of the car that had started it all. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who had walked through fire and found a home in the heart of a lion. As the light flooded the terrace, erasing the shadows of the night, they stood in silence. They couldn't go back to the way things were. The blood, the secrets, and the cages had been burned away. Looking out over the harbor, they watched the birth of a new empire. One built not on fear, but on the quiet, unbreakable strength of a family that had chosen each other in the dark. If this story made you feel something, please like the video and subscribe to this channel for more.